Okay, get ready for this because today we are diving into one of the wildest theories I've ever come across. It connects 90s Brad Pitt, a couple of Levi's commercials, the deep, deep wiring of the human brain, and get this, abstract mathematics. I know, it sounds absolutely crazy, but stick with me because the way it's all put together is surprisingly elegant and honestly, pretty mind blowing.
So, when you hear a quote like this, what do you think it's describing? Maybe a brilliant scientific theory? A classic work of art? Well, what if I told you it's describing a philosophical framework built entirely around two commercials for blue jeans? Yeah, according to the people who came up with this, it's a powerful tool designed specifically to shape the adolescent mind. The real question is, how on earth does it do that? So here's our roadmap for unpacking this whole thing. We're going to start with the ads themselves, then we'll decode their hidden biological meaning, look at how our brains are supposed to process it all, and then we're going to map it onto a geometric framework. And finally, we'll see who this incredibly elaborate lesson was really for. It's a journey for sure. All right, so let's start with something we can all grab onto. The entire foundation of this theory rests on two iconic Levi's commercials from the early 90s. And who was the star? A very, very young Brad Pitt. In a sea of pretty abstract ideas, these two ads are our anchors. Now, what's so brilliant about these ads is just how simple they seem. The first one, which the theory calls innocence, is pure action. You've got Brad Pitt busting out of confinement, grabbing his freedom, and taking off towards something new. The second ad, called integrity, is the total opposite. It's all about stillness. Just him in a bathtub, being patient, letting time and water transform his genes. So you've got escape versus immersion, action versus patience. You really got to hold on to these two ideas because they are the key to everything else. Okay, so here's where things start to get really weird and wonderful. The theory argues that these simple stories aren't simple at all. In fact, every single character, every action is a direct metaphor for a biological process. It's like a secret symbolic language for what's going on inside our own bodies. Just take a look at this. The prison guard who just stands there and watches Brad escape, he's not just a guard, he's a T cell, a part of our immune system that's designed to protect us but can often only observe. Brad Pitt, the one who kicks off all the action, he represents the Y chromosome, the initiator. The competing desire he rides off towards symbolizes the X chromosome, a new narrative, a new path to bind to. And the fading genes in the tub, that's cell decay, transformation, dissolution over time. All of a sudden, a simple jeans ad becomes this epic tale of our own biological urges. Okay, so it's one thing to have all these clever symbols packed into a commercial, but how do our brains actually pick up on it and store it? I mean, does it even work? Well, that brings us to the engine that's supposed to be driving this whole thing. The theory calls the mechanism dendritic sequencing. Now that sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Think of the dendrites in your brain like tiny tree branches. They don't just take in one piece of information at a time. They're built to absorb layers of stuff, the visuals, the story, and all those biosymbols we just talked about, and weave them all together into one super strong, deeply encoded memory. It's not just a memory, it becomes a template for how you see the world. And this is how it all clicks into place using what we call theory of mind. When you watch that first ad, you don't just see Brad escape, you feel that desire for freedom. But you also empathize with the guard who's stuck there. Then in the second ad, you process a much more grown-up idea that who you are can change, but it takes time. And the end result of all this? It completely reframes desire. It's no longer just some raw impulse, it becomes a projected journey, from that simple act of escape to a more complex state of integrity. All right, now we're going to get to the most abstract part of this whole philosophy, but it's also the most elegant. The theory claims that all these different pieces, the stories, the symbols, the brain functions, can be perfectly mapped onto a mathematical structure, specifically projective geometry. It's basically being presented as a master map for the geometry of our consciousness. Now, don't worry, you don't need to be a math whiz here. We just need to understand a couple of basic concepts. The first one is a projective point. In geometry, it's just a new starting point, a new origin that redefines the space around it. For us, in our minds, a projective point is just a powerful new idea, and this theory says you can actually see one being created in that first commercial. And there it is. The moment Brad Pitt escapes from that prison, that's not just a plot point. In the viewer's mind, that action creates the projective point. It forges a new axis, a new way of thinking, defined by freedom and desire. But of course, a single point is just the beginning. What happens when that new idea opens up a whole world of possibilities? Well, that brings us to something called a sheaf of lines. It sounds complicated, but just picture a bunch of lines all exploding out from one single point, like a firework. It's a beautiful way to visualize multiple paths, multiple futures, all starting from one single decision. And that is exactly what happens next in the story. So when Brad rides off toward that competing desire, he's geometrically expanding that single point of freedom into a sheaf of lines. That one act of escape doesn't just have one outcome, it opens up a universe of potential futures. But what about that second commercial, the one about patience and time? Well, that needs a whole different geometric concept. And that concept is the plane at infinity. The easiest way to think about this is to just picture the horizon. You know how parallel train tracks seem to meet way out in the distance? That meeting point is on the plane at infinity. It represents long-term transformation, the place where separate things merge over time. And this is a perfect symbol for the second ad, right? The immersion in the water, the slow fading of the genes, it's all about that gradual change. Okay, let's take a step back. We have the stories, we have the biosymbols, we have the brain science, and now we have the geometry. But what is it all for? Why would anyone build such an incredibly complex system around a couple of commercials? Well, that brings us to the real purpose, priming a very, very specific audience. The target, according to this theory, is a 14-year-old. And not just any 14-year-old. Specifically, a 14-year-old who is a strong 3D visual thinker. This isn't random. It is surgically precise. So why 14? Well, because the adolescent brain is basically a perfect storm of receptivity. It's highly emotional, it's incredibly susceptible to media influence, and it's literally rewiring itself in real time in a process called synaptic pruning. It's at this exact developmental moment that a brain is primed to see a powerful cinematic metaphor and encode it not as a story, but as a real-life template for how to behave and who to become. So here's the whole process laid out step by step. First, you view the cinematic metaphor. Then your brain encodes all those layers of meaning through dendritic sequencing. Next, you subconsciously map those concepts onto that geometric framework of possibility. And the final result? A powerful priming effect. A template for your future self is installed. And that really is the ultimate claim. This whole elaborate system isn't really about selling genes. It's designed to provide a geometry for future action. The goal is to take a passive 2-minute viewing experience and turn it into an active, internalized roadmap for navigating the absolute chaos of growing up. Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty massive question. We've seen how the theory is built, layer by elegant layer, from blue genes to biosymbols to brain chemistry. But can a commercial, no matter how clever or well-constructed it is, truly provide a geometry for life? That's definitely something to think about.